the show, my young assistant will loan you a parasol as you sit in the blazing sun. But understand, if you take the parasol, we expect you to stay for the show and give it back at the end. All right, Linus, time check. All right, can any of you good people tell me what time it is?
12:41.
The answer is time to start the show. Can any of you good people tell me what time it is?
Time to start the show.
All right. Good enough. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to our show. This is going to be our demonstration of historical sword fighting techniques. And you may well say, Frank, what do you mean by historical sword fighting techniques?
Frank, what do you mean by historical sword fighting techniques?
Starting about the year 1300, people began writing down instruction books on how to sword fight. Some of those books have survived to the modern times and been translated into modern English. These are two examples of books that we will be doing demos from during the show. One written in the 1400s, one written in the 1500s. There are a bunch of them out there, and everything you see in the show is going to come from a book written between 1300 and about 1650. So, my wife and I are going to start with a combination of a one-handed sword and a small shield known as a buckler. You've probably heard of swashbuckling. That's doing this. I'm told if you have a lot of people, it's more impressive. I know it's kind of lame with just me. But anyhow, somewhere between 1300 and 1350, people wrote down an instruction book on how to fight with this combination of a buckler and a sword. The illustrations show priests, monks, and nuns sword fighting, so we think it was probably written at a cathedral school. Some of the words in it are German, so we figure it's probably in Germany. And based on the clothing they show them wearing, we figure it was, like I said, the early 1300s. The rest of it's kind of guesswork, because they didn't sign it, they didn't date it, they didn't put a location of it. But the book survived. It is the oldest book we have from Europe on how to sword fight. And my wife and I are going to show you a bunch of techniques from that book. Here, come up closer so people can see how nicely we kill each other. One of the things to be aware that the historical sword fights are much shorter than what you see in movies and television. Yep, that's it. My wife goes to pull her sword, I try to knock it down, and she just slides her blade forward on mine, cuts my throat, she goes home, and I don't. But one of these things the books have is for every move there is a counter move. Yes, it's a nice breeze, isn't it? So I can use my buckler, pin her arms, and then she can't cut my throat. We're drifting backwards. But of course, there are counter moves to counter moves. My wife can get her sword out first, she can bring it around and pin my arms, and then she has the advantage. But from that same starting position, there are other things she can do. Stop drifting backwards.
Embarrassing things?
Embarrassing things.
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty embarrassing. The swords weren't really super sharp because you're banging on things all day. And as any of you who have cut tomatoes know, it's the slicing that really cuts them, not the blade pressure itself. So as long as she doesn't slide her hand, and she's wearing gloves, she can give it kind of a twist and pull it out of my hand and embarrass me a lot. But there's things I can do to stop that. I can just use my buckler and scrape her hands off my sword. But of course, counters to counters. She can grab my buckler away, bring up hers together in one hand, and stab me. So one more trick from that starting position. All right, this isn't super deadly, but I promise you, it is very effective. I cannot move either of my hands. But as with all of these things, there are counter moves. I can throw down my sword and buckler, grab my wife, and do something unpleasant.
2 more shows!
But There is a tactical disadvantage to what I did that you may recognize. If I throw down my weapons and my wife is fast enough, it can be very bad for me. All right, so all of those things we showed you come from the same starting position. Now we'll try a different one just for some variety. Remember, historical fights, very short. I knock her sword aside, step forward, stab her in the face, game over. But, counter moves. All she has to do is pull her sword back, mine goes by, she can stab me as she will. But, again, counter moves. Sometimes I actually grab that. If I feel her pull her sword back, I can land mine on my arm, catch hers, pull it away, sometimes hold a grip on it, and then I have the advantage. So that's where we'll end sword and buckler. The next one, I need 2 volunteers from the audience. You, and one more. All right, you. All right, follow the lady in green. At least it looks like green when I'm wearing these glasses. All right. The techniques we're going to show you come from this book, written by Father Hans Lecoqner in 1478. You might not think of priests as big sword fighters, but in the 1400s, if they wanted to go on pilgrimage or travel city to city, there was no highway patrol, no state police. They had to protect themselves, so they were very good at it. Father Hans says that most fights end when the swords come together. One person turns theirs upside down and stabs the other in the face. That's very effective, but it's boring. So we are going to stitch together 4 different fights into one longer sequence, but keep in mind they should all be that short. I got yours.
Yours is nicer.
It is nicer. Now, now. Sit on him. The book, written in 1478, says, have 2 friends ready with a giant bag. Throw him in the name of God. See, right here, this woodcut from 500 years ago. And then it says, do what you will. You turn the page, you see, well, I can't turn the page of my gloves, but it shows them actually playing a game of backgammon with the poor person in the bag. So, all right, let them up. Let's have a round of applause for our volunteers. Now, please return to your seats. All right, next weapon I'll let you and Ian do, and I'll sit down and drink some of this water.
The next weapon we're going to show you is called a long sword, so named because it has a longer blade and a longer handle. This is a knightly weapon and could be used both one and two-handed. If you were charging into battle and going after all those peasants not lucky enough to have horses, you could use it one hand to cut them down. But if you were to face off against a knight, you may want the extra power for the armor. However, if they're in the full plate armor, you would want to switch to a technique called half swording, and then aim for the chinks in the armor with your left hand and power through for your right. Of course, you could also turn it over and use it like a giant warhammer and just conk me in the skull. They call that the murder stroke. Our insurance loves that name. However, the techniques we're going to show you were written from a manual from my favorite swordmaster, Joachim Meyer, in 1570. It's in this book, The Art of Combat, by Geoffrey Forgang. And this book, the physical translations, 2 of our most esteemed members of Phoenix Swords helped with the translation. So, longsword, Joachim Meyer, 1570. Alright, so what happened there? I go for a rash cut, he blocks, I use that momentum to come up. He blocks, he then goes for my head. I step in, I grab his wrist, push away, and nail him in the back of the head.
Why don't we show that to him another time?
Okay, do you want to see that again?
Yeah!
That's not how it ended last time.
I know. At this point, when I feel that he's caught my arm, I just step back and let him push right past. That gives me a nice clean shot.
I think these people down here want to see it again. You want to see it again?
Sure, why don't we move a little closer to him so they can see it?
If I don't overcommit to that push, I can feel him push away. I know what he's going to do, so I just hold my sword here, flick him aside, nail him in the head.
One more time.
But the even ones don't go well for me.
I know.
Trade positions.
Ah!
At this point, I just give up on the whole sword fighting thing entirely. I step behind this leg, pin his knee, reach through and grab his arm, pull it up over his head. And if I was feeling mean, I'd just continue pulling and drop him on the ground.
I can't stop him from doing that. So that is some German longsword from 1570. And now I'll turn it back over to Frank.
All right, so the next one we're going to show you comes from the same year, 1570, from Italy, and is for this very nice, bendy, fast weapon known as a rapier. Now again, rapier fights tended to be very quick, where you just came in and stabbed the other person. So we are going to actually stitch together 4 different fights into a longer one for you. Let's go up here. Gonna drift backwards whether I want you to or not. Now, Master Degrassi says if you're in a fight for your life, stab the other person until they're dead. But he wrote a second book which is called The False Art, which is what to do if you're showing off in Connecticut. All right, he didn't say Connecticut. If you're fast enough to take away the other person's sword, if you're fast enough just to kill them, and in a fight for your life, don't mess around. Now, a couple of years ago, my wife and I were over in London. We went into a bookshop and I found a book on rapier fighting that I had never seen before. And it had a move for what you do if someone is threatening you with a rapier and all you have is a fancy hat. No dagger, no sword, nothing. What you clearly do is you throw the hat in their face, take their sword away from them, and then stab them as needed. I'm not sure I can really recommend that in a fight, but maybe once. Ow. Yeah, then she has the hat. All right. So now we're going to talk about an anti-rapier weapon, and I'll let Tom and my wife talk about that, and I'll go drink more water.
The next manual we're going to talk about is one that was written in about around 1600 from a sword master that went by the name of George Silver, and he hated this weapon, the rapier. Hated it. The reason why he hated it is he said it's a very bendy weapon, and if you go to block somebody's sword, it'll keep bending, and it might bend inside of you, which would be very bad. So he preferred the English backsword, which has a slightly shorter blade, but much stiffer, less bendy, and better for defense. We're going to show you a couple of plays from that book. First one without daggers. Now, I'm going to go into a guard or a ward called Gardent, and he felt that this was an excellent ward for defending yourself. Ha! Oh dear. Well, I go in for that stab, she blocks, goes under her blade, locks my sword, and then, well, I'm shish kebab. And I hate being called Bob.
Yeah, no, I recognize it.
So she goes in for a thrust. I parry and pin her weapon. She she still has something to defend herself with. I need to lure that out. So I do a feint strike. She bites. I see that, and I do a quick boulinet to her neck. These are very fast weapons, very sharp, and that would have ended the fight right there. Now, these two would have met on the streets of England. Who do you think has the advantage? Somebody's seen our show before. Now, what I can do is I can defend with both the dagger and the sword. Then I can use my dagger as a nice little aiming device. And then I can pick her nose. And that is where we'll end some George Silver.
All right, the next one we're going to show you is for another curved one-handed sword known as the Dusach. It also comes from that Art of Combat book that's down here in the grass by Joachim Meyer. These are not good Dusachs. We haven't found a good Dusach reproduction. These are cavalry sabers. They are a different weapon, but they're about the right length and curve, so we can show you these techniques even if it's not a perfect reproduction of the weapon. Now, one of the things I will tell you is, like the other ones, these fights should be very short, and we are actually stitching together 4 different fights to turn it into a longer one for you. Now you notice there was no clear-cut winner in that. That is because Master Meyer says if you try 3 things and none of them work, you're outclassed. Give up and go home. So we each tried 3 moves. They didn't work. Putting them down. Now I've shown you a bunch of swords. Now we're going to move into some other weapons, because there are books written on the others. Yes, come on out, Noeli. Now, where's the historical one?
On the ground over here.
Oh yes, buried in the grass. The medieval dagger was a very nasty weapon. It's a big point, not much of a cutting edge, but very pointy. If you had someone in the ring armor, you could put it here and hammer it in through the rings. If you had someone wearing the plate armor, you could stick this between joints, crack it open like a lobster. But of course, what you really wanted to do was put this over somebody's visor of their armor and say, "Give up, come back to my castle, I'll send a ransom note to your family."
Didn't that happen to King Richard?
It did happen to King Richard. It happened to everybody of every rank, but the more money you had, the better. So, again, Joachim Meyer's book from 1570 has sections on the dagger. Casey and his daughter will now show you those techniques, which involve a lot of wrestling because it's a very short weapon.
Right. Discreet and good for murders. Murders involve robberies. Pin that. Okay. So the first thing I see is she doesn't have a dagger out and I'm reaching for it, so she pulls. Kick the knee to throw me over, but also pushing across rather than trying to slap or push through. Oh, she's mad and now she's got a dagger out. Okay, so what you're seeing there, I'm coming for that low stab and she'll pin it and grab the wrist. Knock him out and finish him off. But that doesn't give us nearly as much leverage as a striking stab. Okay, so if you've both struck and tangled, sometimes you have to give up your dignity and your blade and punch out a little girl. Once again, she's using the leverage of her body. She's being kind about it by using that pommel. Could use the blade. There it is, those German girls that break your heart. But there are counters to this if you see it coming. if I can get there in time to catch it and bring it through, I take back that advantage.
All right,
Now I
that was
think-
some German dagger. Now we're going to switch to some Italian dagger with Ian and CJ.
Italians break something out.
Yes. Now, one thing you might have noticed that with most of the books that we've talked about, with the very notable exception of the style and hat, everything has been about matched weapons. Dagger versus dagger, sword versus sword. Everybody kind of assumes you're fighting somebody with the same thing. How often is that really going to happen? There was a master by the name of Faire who said that what's most likely going to happen is you're going to have somebody with a knife who's going to be walking down the street, and that's a bad thing for you. So he said, well, let's come up with some techniques about what to do with mismatched weapons. So one of the ones we're going to start off, I don't know, I think I'm a little bigger and I have the knife. I think I've got a pretty good advantage here.
Can I have the knife?
Only if you can take it away from me.
All right.
You ready?
Yeah. Not only do I have the knife and I can stab him in the kidneys, I have him in a compromising position. When I stab him, I can dump him on his head and I get the dagger.
Maybe I shouldn't have said that.
Dagger!
All right, I'm going to take something bigger, mismatched weapons.
Okay, you gotta put that back in its sheath though, because there's a law on open carry weapons.
All right,
In
she is
medieval
right.
times there was rules. Follow the rules.
She is right. If I'm walking around town and I've got my sword out, just kind of doing my own thing, if a fight starts, guess who they blame? Me. They say I've got the weapon, I'm obviously looking for trouble. So I've got to have my weapon put away. But this isn't fair because now I could be walking down and that sneaky dagger gets me again. Fiore had some tricks for this. I don't have to pull my weapon to use it to block. Block the knife with the scabbard and then pull. Now I can keep her arm pinned while I skewer her. Nice little trick.
Okay, can I do that again? No, wait, I just want to... Yeah, we can do it again.
Do it again? Okay. Ready? Hey!
Who wins?
Can we just call this one a draw?
I don't like a draw. You got to go bigger. I want to go bigger.
Oh boy.
This is why everybody came. I want this.
This is so big.
Mike and Warren.
This is what's called a pole hammer. It would have a hammer on one side, a spike on the other, a spear point. It'd even have a spear point down here, maybe even some spikes on the side. Just a whole big deadly weapon on a stick. Now you might notice this one looks a little funny compared to our other weapons. Kind of bendy. It's because these are made of rubber. The real ones are horrifically dangerous, and I really don't want to swing a 5-pound block of sharp metal at my wife's head.
Long drive home.
Yeah, it's a long drive home.
I'm driving. Let's do this.
All right.
Ready?
Yep. Like I said, that's a big block of metal on the end of that stick. If I can deflect it, its momentum's going to carry it right out of the way. And remember I mentioned the spear point? That's what it's for.
Okay, do it again.
Do over?
I want to do over.
All right. Didn't work, did it?
No.
At that point, I can use the tip of mine, catch it with the spike or the hammer, throw it back, and step back in.
All right. Do over.
Again, haven't you?
Do it. Hey, I'm stubborn. I'm Scottish. Do
All
over.
That's one way to sweep your wife off her feet.
It works really well. Several times today we've mentioned the step behind the knee for that. That's exactly what I do here. Step behind the knee, and then I bring that stick up and throw her right over. And at that point, that spear's really good too.
All right.
This seems
No,
unfair.
come
You just
back.
keep
I want
knocking
a
your wife
do-over.
over.
Another do-over.
I want to.
Haven't you? That's 3 times.
That's okay. Third time's a charm, right?
All right. Hey. All right, so what happened there?
He went. I faked. He went up. I went down for his toes. When I didn't get his toes, I just hammered him in the face.
Now, there's another technique that's from another book by Joachim Meyer, who seems to be picking up a whole bunch of stuff here. Very quick, very simple technique.
Who's gonna win?
You are.
Ready?
Yep.
Now he doesn't have anything, and I can poke him with the pokey bits.
All right, for the last weapon, we are going to show you the medieval lawnmower. In 1550, a man named Paulus Hector Mayer wrote a book where he tried to collect all the sword fighting techniques in Europe. He had bought every copy of every book he could find. He put all the techniques together into this 3-volume full-color illustrated set that just goes over everything, including unusual weapons like the sickle. And then someone said, how does a civil servant from Munich afford all this? They found out he was embezzling city funds and executed him. But his books were wonderful and we still have them. So my wife and I are going to show you some techniques for fighting with the sickle, which are from his book from 1550. And I will say that this one is particularly important to us at Phoenix Swords because we paid to have this translated out of the medieval Latin. So to the best of our knowledge, we're the only people in North America doing this because not so many friends or people have friends who are out-of-work Latin teachers these days. So one of the things is the smaller the weapon, the more grabbing there is. This is a very tiny weapon, so there'll be a lot of grabbing between me and my wife. All right, let's show another one. Ow! This one says she tries to hit me with her sickle and I block. I try and hit her and she blocks, and then it says she skins my arm. Does not say block, instead it says hit her in the head. So in Munich in 1550, maybe a bunch of people didn't have much skin on their left arms. This one says she grabs my hand and tries to cut it off. Fortunately, it says block and try and hit her in the face. Then it says when she blocks, she, quote, cuts to my loins. But fortunately, it says block and hit her in the head. Cost us 3 pairs of pants getting that one right. All right, the last one is the painful one. So once we do this, I'm going to sit down and we'll ask my wife and Tom to finish us up. I will ask those of you who we loaned parasols to please give them back to Caitlin again at the end of the show. But now the painful one.
Okay, what happened there? More arm out to the right like I did previously. And I simply, a lot of you recognize this, put all the power behind my hand and my body behind the hand, right into his sternum. He may be larger than I am, he may be stronger than I am, but he's certainly going to think twice about taking me on or doing anything further for a few minutes.
You got that right.
So, Tom is going to take us out.
So thank you for coming out in the hot sun today, folks. We are Phoenix Swords. This was our historical combat demonstration. We'll be back here at 3 o'clock. The sword fighting will be serious, but the plot is very, very silly. And come watch my daughter beat up a 44-year-old and my son beat up a 58-year-old.
Woo.
Thank you for sticking out the hot sun.
I'm not sure the numbers, Tom.
Yeah, I was going to say, you don't have to tell people how old we are.
Oh, really? Come on,
If you
man.
have any questions, feel free to talk to us right
Yes,
here.
you're welcome to stop by our red and white tent and we can explain any of these techniques we use.